Welcome to the channel. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Join me in today's video where we'll be reviewing the Martin Sn006 GB. Now, I gave you a quick unboxing and a brief introduction to this watch back when I did the 11/11 AliExpress sale. It was one of the watches that I recommended, and I had it in just a few weeks before that in order for me to review it. So today we'll be giving this watch a full and thorough review. This is my first hands-on experience with this particular model from St. Martin, so everything here is pretty new to me. So let's talk about the facts and figures before we move on to the review of the actual watch. Specs wise, you've got a low dome box style sapphire crystal with AR coating. You've also got a ceramic insert on a 120 click unidirectional dive bezel. The watch runs the Epson/Orient YN55 movement, which is more or less exactly the same as the Seiko NH35 in terms of running and specification, with some very minor differences. The watch does have 200 meters of water resistance, aided by a screw-down crown and a screw-down case back. Now, with regards to this sub-style homage, first and foremost, it is homaging quite a retro vintage sub-model. And with that in mind, this is quite different to all the common sub-homages out there. And the main thing I actually do want to focus on is the case shape, the profile, and the dimensions, because I think this has done something quite different, which does make it stand out from the crowd. And I really do like some of the measurements that they've given on this watch. Now, let's start off with the case shape. Usually with the standard sub-style homages, what you get is you get quite a broad case shape, with some broad shoulders on there, and it gives it an extremely flat appearance. Now, while this case does retain that extremely flat, profile, what you'll notice is the case does change shape slightly. You find a bit more of a taper or a curve when you look at the sides of the case, a bit more of a barrel style shape, which I think does really do well for the aesthetics. It does make it look a bit nicer. And with that, you still retain that 40mm case diameter. Now, another point is when we look at the crown guards and the crown, you'll notice they are significantly shorter than the usual sub-style cases, where the crown guards, do protrude quite a bit. The crown is quite thick. And, I like what they've done with this one, where it is still quite compact against the side of the case, giving you an overall diameter of only 43.2mm. And what I also like is the fact that they've retained the size of the crown, because it's quite important for functionality. So the crown size is just a touch under 7mm. However, it is only 3mm thick, so it allows the crown to be quite short but still retain that grip. Now, the lug to lug is 49mm. However, St. Martin do claim 48.5mm, and the way they get this number is when they look at from the female end links. You'll notice the links do sit just slightly in past the lugs. Therefore, at this point on the watch, it is actually 48.5mm, but overall it still is 49 when you look at the lug tips. The case thickness is 13mm, which is not a bad shout considering you do have that box style sapphire crystal. And with regards to the lug width, it is 20mm, and it does have a really nice taper down to 16mm just before the clasp and going up to 18 at the clasp. So overall, I think dimensionally this watch does stand out. It is quite different from the usual homages that we have out there. Yes, bearing in mind it is homaging a particular variant, a vintage sub, but the execution is really well done. Overall, it gives the watch a very different character, quite a different personality, and it wears entirely differently on wrist. Now, one of the things which I'm not so impressed with is the actual style dial they use. In fact, the texture or the color is a very dull, matte, almost grey dial. And, I thought we were done with these dials, to be honest. And I'd like to see a glossier dial, not even sunburst, or maybe more enamel, so you get that deep piano black. I get that it's vintage inspired, but these grey dials, I feel we've gone way past that. There's no depth in that dial, and it does look quite boring. But aside from that, it's got the usual St. Martin build quality. You've got perfectly aligned applied hour markers. It's a maxi style dial with those polished frames around all the markers. You've got a printed minute track. You've got that applied St. Martin logo with a dual style finish. Now, you'll also notice the symmetry on this dial. Yes, it is a no date version, which I quite like. And there is a bit more of a push for no date designs. I think it's just for simplicity, ease of use. A lot of people, especially in the homage world, if you own homage watches, you do have more than 3 or 5 watches, and believe me, it is a bit more of a convenience without having the date present. However, with the movement they've used, you still get a ghost position. Not only that, you still get a clicking sound from the date disc, so they haven't even gone in to modify that, and I find that to be extremely lazy watchmaking, especially with the Seiko NH38 being readily available on AliExpress as well. Now, the dial hour markers, you'll find them to be slightly off-white, which gives it a slight mismatch against the paint or the numerals on the bezel insert, which is a lot whiter and a lot more brilliant, and that's due to the BGW9 Lume application. So let's go ahead and let's see how well they've done on the Lume. So an indicator to how well the Lume is due to that off-white color on the hour markers. That's because the more layers of BGW9 you seem to apply, it does go slightly yellowish. And it's only due to other suppliers where they add some more coloration to make that pigment a lot whiter. The application of the Lume, I have no issues with at all. It is very bright, it's really well applied, there's no patchiness. You can see that pip at the 12 also, and the hands and the hour markers are pretty well lit. And with the absence of the date window, you get a very symmetrical visual. So you've got great level of Lume applied, and it's something which I've come to expect from St. Martin. Now, looking at the bezel a lot closer, a lot of you eagle-eyed viewers have already probably spotted the issue here is the fact that the bezel is misaligned. Now, this is probably the first misaligned bezel I've had from St. Martin in such a long time. Even though the rotation of that bezel is actually very smooth, very crisp, and very nice to use, it's just missing the alignment. So it just misses that center spot by such a degree, and it doesn't even have just the slightest bit of playback which could bring it back to the center. So this is quite a negative, and I know a lot of people will find this quite a negative. Personally, it doesn't really bother me as much as it should do. However, I understand on wrist or as a visual, and especially with what St. Martin give us, usually we have come to expect perfect alignment. However, aside from that, the bezel insert is really well done. I love the actual shape of the bezel. Notice how low that profile is. There's no sharp edges along those scallops. They've been very finely done, and of course they've also been finished nicely. You've got linear brushing around the side, and you've got the polished sort of scallops in the center. And I'm a huge fan of this low profile bezel, and I like how it functions. I like the clicks as well, and as I said, I really do like that movement, just minus that poor alignment. Now, moving on to the case, this is by far my most liked feature about this watch. It's a thing which I'm most impressed with, and it's a thing which does separate this watch from all the homages out there. It's that level of finishing and that detailing which have carried over from a lot of the watch cases. The first thing that you're going to notice is the sides of those lugs. The edges are beveled and polished, and you guys know that feature. I really like that on cases, and and it does make a case look so much more premium. And they've also got this very fine circular brushing across the lugs. On the ending of the bracelet, you've got that similar style of brushing going in a linear fashion down the lugs, giving you some really good uniform finishing. And that finishing is exquisite in hand. It's just so fine, you can barely see the grain, and it does give it a very premium look. They've stuck with the highly polished sides, of course, as per the homage. This is what you kind of get on all the watches, and you notice how still it remains quite flat. But the addition to this case is they've added drilled lugs, which is going to make strap changes a lot easier. And with this style of watch, I think it's going to welcome many strap changes, as I think this will be quite a strap monster. Now, when we move up to the crown, it is signed, and as I said, the function is really good on this. I like that thinner profile of the crown. I like how it sits within the crown guards, and the fact that it is still 7mm does give you great function, and it screws down nicely as well, with no grittiness within those threads. It catches it really well, and again, good function. The case back, however, is unsigned, very plain, and it's not indifferent to what we see on almost all the homages out there. And it appears that St. Martin have stopped signing the case backs. I don't feel any particular type of way about this, but I'm curious in what you guys think. Now, moving on to the bracelet, of course, the main thing about this watch or this bracelet which is going to appeal is the use of female end links. It does make the watch a lot more wearable, and it does give the bracelet so much more articulation. Now, this is your standard 3-link bracelet. It does have polished sides, screw-in links, very fine hairline brushing. As you can see, just that quality of brushing present. Very smooth indeed. Feels nice and premium. There is no kind of edginess on there. You can see the edges of this watch have been slightly finished and slightly rounded, so it doesn't feel as edgy as the usual bracelets. The clasp is the usual clasp that they've been using on quite a lot of their models. Like the profile of the clasp, as you can see, in comparison to that 16mm width towards the clasp, that 18mm clasp does seem to suit that profile really well. It doesn't stick out too much, and I like the look, and it has been executed well. The finishing on the clasp is immaculate as always, and that bracelet, everything is quite uniform. I love the brushing on this case and bracelet. It gives it such a great look. So let's show you this watch on wrist. So here's the San Martin Sn006 GB on my 6.5-inch wrist. The watch was an absolute ease to size, and the bracelet gave me no issues at all. The screws are really well made. You know, you've got premium threading on there, so they don't catch, there's no grittiness, and you don't have any issues at all. And as I said, going back to that bracelet taper, I think that looks really good on wrist, going down from 20 all the way to 16, and that slimmer 18mm clasp. However, you know, you still have some of the issues on how this particular watch case weighs. It is pretty flat, so you don't get the curvature of the lugs that your wrist actually wants. You can see it lifts from the sides, and everything about this watch, you just want it to kind of grip and hug the wrist from the top. However, I much prefer these newer dimensions. I really love the finishing. I like the female end links, because that 49mm lug to lug on this 6.5-inch wrist does make that difference, because the lugs tend to stop there and the links are allowed to kind of articulate around that wrist, whereas, you know, with the male end links, they do stick out that little bit more, and it makes it that much more uncomfortable to wear. I'm impressed with that box style sapphire crystal. I think that's a good move, and that aesthetic of that bezel. You know, it's all about the profile and dimensions with this one. In terms of negatives, you know, the two main ones for me is that matte dial. You can see in the camera it looks very unimpressive, very underwhelming. I think a glossier enamel dial would have looked just so much better. And of course, that misaligned bezel, that has to be called out. The positives are, as I've just mentioned, the case profile, the case finishing, the female end links on that bracelet, and that bezel profile. You know, everything else is absolutely fine. And in terms of the bracelet, you know, I do want to see San Martin, you know, go the next step up and provide us with a on-the-fly adjustment. I feel San Martin have been sitting in this sort of area for a while now. You know, they seem to be getting quite complacent, in all honesty. They've been giving us this standard level of watches now, and you know, to be continuously improving, you've got to give more now. It is about time now that San Martin start giving us these little additional features, because the prices do seem to be creeping up. On the note of price, this is £229. I'll put up the dollar conversion to my left or right, and if you had got this in the sale, you would have got a great deal. Now, do I think this watch is worth £229? I have to say yes, it is, if you got one without the bezel issue. I think the case, you know, finishing, the bracelet, the profile, you know, this being so different yet homogeneous, a very popular watch, I think it does justify that price, especially considering, you know, all the other watches out there, and considering, you know, material and labor going up slightly. I think the price is reasonable, but you just need, you know, a bit more to give. That enamel dial, as I said, you know, a great bezel, and then I'll be more than happy to pay the asking price. But you know, you do have a Black Friday sale coming up, so keep an eye on that. And if you get the £20 off, for example, and this watch comes in at closer to £200, well worth it. So that's it from me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed that review. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.